Before you relax and drift into this story, I just want to ask you one thing. If you enjoy my voice and the story itself, please let me know in the comments. It really means a lot to me.
Imagine lying in bed, silk sheets tucked around your body, candles flickering on gilded walls, and a servant crouched under your blanket, warming your feet with their breath. No, this isn't a twisted fairy tale, it was the bedtime ritual of certain European monarchs. But the strangest part? That wasn't even close to the weirdest thing royalty did before going to sleep. Because if you peel back the velvet curtains of history, you'll find a world of nighttime rituals so bizarre, so unthinkable, they make our modern bedtime routines look almost primitive by comparison. Let's begin in Versailles, under the rule of the infamous Louis XIV, the Sun King. His bedtime was a public spectacle. Imagine needing an audience just to put on your pajamas. Well, not pajamas exactly. Louis didn't just change into sleepwear, he undressed in front of a carefully selected group of nobles. This daily ritual was called the coucher, and it was considered an honor to witness the king prepare for bed. Nobles fought tooth and nail for the privilege of handing the king his nightshirt. The irony? Most of them would then return to freezing rooms filled with chamber pots, while Louis fell asleep in a heated, perfumed chamber surrounded by silken tapestries and gold. But Louis wasn't just indulging in ceremony. Every moment, even bedtime, was about power. If you controlled who saw you undress, you controlled who felt important. Sleep was not escape, it was performance. Elsewhere in Europe, a very different kind of ritual played out. In Russia, Tsar Peter the Great's nights were far from restful. Obsessed with reforming Russian society, Peter believed in hard work, harsh discipline, and regular dental inspections. He would sometimes perform tooth extractions on his courtiers before bed, just for fun. He kept the pulled teeth in a jar beside his bed like trophies. A macabre bedside collection. Some say he did it to conquer his fear of death. Others believe it was simply another way to assert dominance. Strange? Sure, but not unique. In China's Forbidden City, the emperor's bedtime came with a strange twist of fate. Each night, a group of eunuchs would randomly select one of the emperor's concubines for him to sleep with. She'd be carried naked inside a red silk blanket delivered to his chamber like a prized offering. The emperor wouldn't know which concubine he'd receive until she appeared. And if a child was conceived that night, the official record would note the exact time, date, and even the weather. Powerful men controlling the intimacy of others. Other men controlling theirs. In the end, even the bedroom was about statecraft. But not all weirdness was cruel. Sometimes it was simply peculiar. Take Queen Elizabeth I. She ruled England with unmatched brilliance, but her nights were wrapped in mystery. She famously refused to sleep in the same bed twice. It's said she had over 20 beds scattered across her palaces, and she rotated between them constantly. Why? Some say it was paranoia, fear of assassination. Others believe it was simply restlessness of the mind. Her nights were sleepless, filled with political documents, personal letters, and poetry she'd write in candlelight. She may have ruled the world by day, but at night she was haunted by ghosts, real or imagined. Then there's Napoleon Bonaparte. The man who nearly conquered Europe slept just 4 hours a night and demanded silence so complete that he once fired a valet for snoring outside his room. He took sleep as a strategic weapon, claiming he could outthink his enemies by sleeping less. And yet, in private, he slept beside a small golden statue of his first wife, Josephine, even after their divorce. He'd kiss it before sleep. Every night. No matter how many battles he fought or empires he raised, Napoleon fell asleep like a broken-hearted man whispering to a memory. The deeper you dig, the more bizarre it gets. King Charles VI of France, also known as Charles the Mad, refused to sleep in a bed for weeks because he believed he was made of glass. He feared that if he lay down, he would shatter into 1,000 pieces. Courtiers were instructed never to touch him, and servants would stand guard all night to ensure he didn't accidentally hurt himself. His condition was one of the earliest recorded cases of glass delusion, a rare psychological disorder found almost exclusively among royals and nobles. What caused it? Inbreeding? Stress? Isolation? Or perhaps the unbearable weight of power itself? Meanwhile, in Mughal India, Emperor Jahangir had his own bedtime rituals. Every night, musicians would play soft sitar melodies as perfumers sprinkled rose water through the air. But behind the dreamy aesthetics lay something far more disturbing. The emperor was known to consume small amounts of opium and wine before bed, both for pleasure and supposed spiritual insight. His journals describe vivid dreams in which he spoke with prophets, ancestors, and animals. He believed these visions guided his rule. His sleep wasn't for rest, it was a bridge to another world. Across the globe in Japan, shoguns had their own nocturnal customs. Tokugawa Ieyasu, founder of the Tokugawa shogunate, would sleep with a dagger under his pillow. Not out of fear, but readiness. Every night, he believed he had to be prepared to defend his life. His sleep was light, brief, and burdened by responsibility. He trusted no one completely, not even his own family. His last thought before sleep wasn't peace, but survival. And in ancient Egypt, the pharaohs believed sleep was a temporary death and dreams were messages from the gods. Some slept with sacred amulets under their pillows to summon specific deities in their dreams. Others employed dream priests who would interpret visions the next morning. Imagine falling asleep not to rest, but to enter a sacred trance, hoping for divine guidance before the sun rose. But perhaps no royal bedtime was as controlled or as lonely as that of Queen Victoria. After the death of her beloved Prince Albert, she never truly slept alone again, but not in the way you might think. For 40 years after his death, she insisted that his nightclothes be laid out each evening. His shaving water was prepared, his bed turned down, a silent ritual performed night after night for a man who no longer lived. It was as if sleep allowed her to exist in a world where he hadn't died. A royal ghost story told not with words, but linens and empty spaces. And what about the kings who feared betrayal in their sleep? Henry VIII, known for his paranoia and brutality, took bedtime precautions to a new level. He had custom-designed beds with secret compartments and trapdoors. He refused to sleep in the same room twice in a row. And before bed, his food, wine, and even his pillows were inspected by trusted servants. It wasn't just assassination he feared, it was poisoning, smothering, betrayal. Imagine the weight of knowing that every person around you might want your crown or your head. These nightly fears weren't just quirks. They were the shadows of immense power. Because when you sit at the top of the world, the darkness doesn't always bring rest, it brings vulnerability. And yet, even in all this strangeness, there's a thread that connects these rulers to us. The need for comfort, the hope for safety, the yearning for love. It's all there buried beneath the rituals and madness. But there's more, much more. Because we haven't even talked about the royal who slept with their eyes open, or the empress who believed dreams could predict coups, or the king who used bedtime as political strategy to manipulate alliances and sow suspicion. And what about the queen who insisted on being sung lullabies in 6 different languages every night, each verse by a different courtier? You might think we're reaching the edge of absurdity. But no, the weirdest is still to come. In the twilight corridors of the Spanish royal court, a whisper traveled faster than footsteps. Queen Joanna of Castile refused to sleep unless she lay beside the dead body of her husband. After the sudden death of Philip the Handsome, Joanna's grief curdled into obsession. She ordered his body exhumed, placed it in a coffin laced with fine fabrics, and traveled with it by night. She slept beside it, guarded it, whispered to it, for months, maybe years. No one knows how much of it was madness and how much was love so deep it outlasted reason. But that's the thing about bedtime. It's when we're most unguarded, most human. And for those burdened with thrones, being human is often the most dangerous thing of all. Let's shift to the Ottoman Empire. In the Topkapi Palace, bedtime wasn't just a matter of rest, it was strategy. The Sultan's concubines, numbering in the hundreds, were ranked, trained, and selected with military precision. Every evening, a chamberlain would light a candle and pass through the harem. The concubine whose face was touched by the flame would be chosen to spend the night with the Sultan. But here's the twist, the chosen woman had to pretend she hadn't been expecting it. She had to feign surprise, humility, desire, all while knowing her life might change by morning. A single night in the Sultan's bed could elevate her from obscurity to Empress Mother or lead to quiet exile. Sleep became a currency. Desire, a battlefield. Elsewhere, in Korea's Joseon dynasty, kings kept meticulous sleeping journals not for dreams but for royal duty. Every time a king spent the night with a consort, it was recorded. Who, when, for how long, and in what condition. Why? Because royal lineage had to be traced with mathematical precision. The birth of a child wasn't a private affair, it was a state event. And bedtime was part of the bureaucracy. But the strangest rituals weren't always about sex, power, or politics. Sometimes they were about belief. Consider Emperor Nero of Rome. His nights were filled with omens. He refused to sleep unless his astrologers gave him a favorable reading. If the stars were hostile, he would delay sleep, pace his palace, or host impromptu performances, forcing his guests to listen to his poetry and harp playing until dawn. Some accounts say he once ordered a slave executed because they yawned during one of his nighttime shows. To Nero, sleep wasn't rest, it was risk. A cosmic gamble. And then there's Catherine the Great of Russia. She believed that the shape and scent of a room could affect her dreams. Her chambers were redesigned dozens of times, walls repainted, furniture shifted, perfumes changed, all to find the perfect balance of dream influence. Lavender one week, ambergris the next. She demanded silence so absolute that guards wore felt on their boots. But even so, she often woke before dawn, took ice baths, and wrote notes on military campaigns while her dogs still snored at her feet. Her mind never fully shut down. Even in sleep, she ruled. Royal children, too, were not spared the strangeness. The Dauphin of France, heir to the throne, was bathed, powdered, and dressed in elaborate sleeping gowns each night, surrounded by nobles who watched the ritual like a ballet. He wasn't allowed to speak unless spoken to. The air had to be infused with orange blossom. And sometimes, when he cried from fear or exhaustion, the courtiers applauded his composure, mistaking emotional repression for strength. That child grew into Louis XVI. In contrast, the young Queen Christina of Sweden would sleep in full armor. As a child, she demanded a soldier's uniform and insisted on sleeping on hard floors. She claimed softness made the mind weak. Even at 10 years old, she saw sleep not as a sanctuary, but as training for battle. And while some royals feared betrayal in their sleep, others feared themselves. Emperor Tiberius, near the end of his reign, was so paranoid of his own impulses that he ordered his servants to bind his hands lightly with silk ropes before bed to stop him from harming himself in a night terror. He feared the monsters in his own mind more than any assassin. But let's go deeper. Let's talk about the kings who slept with animals. King George III of England, before madness swallowed his final years, reportedly refused to sleep without his favorite pet birds nearby. He believed their singing calmed his nerves and prevented nightmares. When one of his birds died, he entered a period of insomnia so severe that his doctors feared permanent damage. And King Frederick William I of Prussia? He kept a collection of pet deer in his chamber. Live, at night, he'd stroke their antlers and talk to them. Some say he believed they were reincarnations of dead generals. Others say it was simply loneliness wrapped in delusion. You may laugh, but think about it. How many of us need white noise, or a warm pet beside us, or a memory to hold onto in the dark? Now picture this, a king, lonely, powerful, terrified, whispering to deer in the moonlight. And realize it's not so different from us. Then there were the rulers whose rituals were so strange they bordered on mysticism. Ashurbanipal, the Assyrian king, surrounded his bed with cursed tablets, stone inscriptions said to ward off evil spirits. He believed sleep made him vulnerable to demons, so his bed was positioned on a sacred diagram carved into the floor, each corner aligned with a god's eye. No one was allowed to enter the room unless they had fasted for 12 hours. One misstep and the king believed his soul would be devoured in the dream world. Even in Mesoamerican civilizations, sleep held spiritual significance. Mayan rulers would perform bloodletting rituals before bed, piercing their tongues or genitals and burning the blood as an offering. The idea? Sacrifice before surrender. It was believed that the gods watched over those who gave something of themselves before closing their eyes. Their sleep then was a sacred transaction. Meanwhile, in Ethiopia, the emperors of the Solomonic dynasty slept in complete isolation. Their sleeping chambers were located at the top of remote towers, reachable only by rope ladders which were pulled up each night. No servant, no consort, not even a trusted advisor could join them. They believed solitude protected their divine connection. Each night, they would pray facing the mountains, then sleep under a single woolen sheet, even in winter. If they had dreams, they shared them only with priests. Now let's turn to a ritual so unusual it barely sounds real. King Ludwig II of Bavaria, the same king who built fairy tale castles, insisted on falling asleep to the sound of staged operas. He paid musicians to perform Wagner pieces outside his chamber windows, sometimes at 2 or 3 in the morning. If a note was off, he'd stop the entire performance. Some nights, he wouldn't fall asleep until the 3rd or 4th repetition of a scene. Music wasn't just comfort, it was control. Art tailored to his dreams. And if he woke in the night, he demanded it start again. And then there was the Empress Dowager Cixi of China, who took luxury to another level. Every night, before bed, she was massaged with oils made from crushed pearls and lotus petals. Her sheets were made of the softest silk, changed daily. Her favorite pillow was filled with goose down and fragments of jade, believed to enhance beauty during sleep. But beyond the glamour lay ritual. She burned incense carved with sacred texts. She drank tea made with chrysanthemums and silver flakes. And she listened to a chorus of handmaids recite poetry until she closed her eyes. Her sleep wasn't rest, it was theater, medicine, and religion combined. And not all rituals were serene. The Aztec Emperor Moctezuma had nightmares of falling from the sky. Every night, his priests would anoint his forehead with crushed obsidian and place eagle feathers around his head, believing they would bind his spirit to the earth. He feared flying in his dreams because in his culture that could mean death was coming. Each morning, he awoke and offered thanks for survival. Sleep to him was a battlefield from which not everyone returned. Royalty understood something we often forget. Night is not just absence of light. It's a realm, a passage, a place where power slips, where dreams rise, where the soul is exposed. And so they built rituals to protect themselves from their people, from their past, from themselves. But even with all the rituals, all the guards, all the silk and incense and ceremony, many of them still feared the dark. Maybe more than the rest of us. Because they knew something most don't want to admit. Power doesn't follow you into sleep. Some kings feared sleep. Others tried to control it. Louis XIV, the Sun King of France, didn't just sleep, he performed his sleep. Each night, dozens of courtiers were invited to witness his couture, the ceremonial process of going to bed. It was theater, part sacred rite, part politics. Only a chosen few were allowed to hand him his nightshirt, to draw the curtains, to dim the golden candelabras one by one. But beneath all this extravagance was a curious fear. Louis believed that the moment he let go of his rituals, chaos would enter not just his court, but his body. He suffered from insomnia for years. His physicians prescribed sleeping water, a mix of poppy extract and crushed pearls. Sometimes he refused it, fearing it would make him dream of rebellion. The man who ruled by divine right feared the vulnerability of dreams. And yet, every night, he lay in a room painted with sun motifs, his own symbol, trying to command the dark as if it, too, was his subject. Meanwhile, in China, the Qing emperors had their own strange traditions. Emperor Qianlong, a scholar and warrior, believed that sleep must be earned. He would write poetry until the candle stub died, walk barefoot across his chamber floor, cold stone, no rugs, and meditate before a small shrine of his ancestors. His bed was elevated on a dais covered in fox fur and sandalwood carvings. But the oddest ritual? He had a servant whisper philosophical questions into his ear as he drifted to sleep. He believed that the brain processed problems more creatively in sleep and that dreams were the best place to wrestle with fate. A genius ruler, and yet, in his most private hour, he yearned not for comfort, but clarity. And then there's the strange case of Peter the Great. This towering Tsar of Russia, a man who reformed an empire, had a secret shame: he couldn't fall asleep without the scent of rotting wood. It reminded him of the shipyards of Amsterdam, where he learned to build ships by hand. The scent of damp timber and brine comforted him in a way no silk ever could. So every night, his servants would bring in a bucket of soaked oak shavings to place near his bed. His bed itself was simple, rough wood, no mattress springs, only a thick blanket. He was a man of war and water, and his sleep reflected that, anchored, heavy, and shaped by the sea. But not all rulers sought sleep at night. Some ruled the darkness. Caligula, emperor of Rome, famously reversed the rhythms of the empire. He conducted meetings at night, slept during the day, and insisted that his palace be lit at all hours. He believed the gods visited at night, and he wanted to be awake to receive them. He would lie on a marble slab, eyes wide open, waiting for visions. Sometimes he claimed the moon spoke to him. Other times he screamed at shadows. He banned owls from flying near the palace, believing they carried ill omens. And when insomnia struck, he wandered barefoot through the halls, wrapped in nothing but a cloak of purple silk, muttering curses against his enemies. Sleep was a battlefield, and Caligula fought alone. In Korea, King Yongjo had an equally strange custom. He never used the same bed twice in a week. Every night, he chose a different chamber in his vast palace complex, often at random to avoid assassination attempts. Only 2 people ever knew which room he would sleep in, himself and a single loyal eunuch. His bed was always placed near a mirror, and before sleep, he would stare into it for several minutes, whispering confessions. He believed that mirrors trapped lies, and he wanted his last thought before sleep to be pure. But perhaps no royal sleep ritual was more surreal than that of Haile Selassie, Emperor of Ethiopia. He believed in the divine energy of lions. In his palace, a pair of lions was kept just outside his chamber. Before sleep, he would walk between them, slowly, deliberately, barefoot as a test of his spirit. If the lions growled, he took it as a sign of unresolved guilt. If they remained silent, he felt at peace. Then he would burn frankincense, place a stone under his pillow, and sleep facing the east, toward Jerusalem. His chamber was devoid of luxury. Just a wooden frame bed, hand-woven blankets, and a single candle. The emperor of one of Africa's greatest dynasties, choosing simplicity in the one place no crown could protect, sleep. And yet, for all the oddities, one ritual stands out as the most human of all. Napoleon Bonaparte, conqueror of half of Europe, had one of the simplest sleep routines in history. He often slept only 4 hours a night, sometimes even standing or slumped in a chair. But when he did lay down, it was always on his stomach, hands under his pillow, boots still on. Why? He once said a man should be ready to ride or die, even in dreams. And yet, he kept a small token under his pillow, a folded silk handkerchief that belonged to Josephine. Even after their divorce, even after betrayal, he carried the scent of her into every battlefield of sleep. A man of steel and storms, still haunted by love. Then there's the curious case of Empress Dowager Cixi. Ruling from behind a screen, she was one of the most powerful women in Chinese history. Yet her bedtime rituals were steeped in superstition. She slept with jade rollers placed along her spine, believing they realigned her qi. Her bed curtains were embroidered with phoenixes, symbols of rebirth. But what she feared most were dreams of snakes. Every night, she burned silk paintings of serpents and had her chambermaids chant ancient mantras to keep dream demons away. Some nights, she slept sitting up, convinced that lying flat invited death. Power didn't free her from fear, it just taught her how to hide it with incense and silk. In the Ottoman Empire, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent had a different obsession: silence. He believed that true kings must learn to master stillness. His chambers were padded to mute every sound. Servants walked barefoot. No ticking clocks, no chimes. Before bed, he would lie on a cold slab of marble, imagining himself dead, practicing stillness. For him, sleep was rehearsal, for judgment, for the afterlife, for legacy. Even his pillow had a cover sewn with verses from the Quran, each word stitched by a blind dervish. And yet, despite the spiritual devotion, it's said he once wept in the night, not for lost battles or politics, but for a dream of a child he never had the chance to raise. Because in the stillness, everything else is loud. Royalty may have commanded armies, built empires, named themselves after gods. But sleep reduced them. To memory, to emotion, to mortality. And then we have Victoria, Queen of Britain, Empress of India, widow. After Prince Albert died, Victoria never slept the same. She ordered his nightclothes laid out each evening as if he might still return. His bed remained beside hers, untouched. Sometimes she whispered to the empty space. Sometimes she wrote him letters and placed them on the pillow. One of her maids recalled seeing her hold one of Albert's shirts to her face, breathing in the scent before she lay down. For decades, every single night, love may die, but habits remain. Sleep is the most democratic act a human performs. And yet, for those in power, it becomes a mirror, a stage, a confession booth, a battlefield, a fantasy. Some feared sleep because of guilt. Some transformed it into performance. Some used it to escape. Others never truly found it. The strangest royal bedtime rituals aren't just about gold, silk, or superstition. They're about the burdens that power leaves behind when the crown comes off. The echo of deeds, the cost of legacy, the loneliness that no empire can fill. And as we peek behind those royal curtains, we realize these weren't just eccentricities. They were cries. Cries for comfort, control, forgiveness. Cries for something soft in a world that demanded they be made of stone. And so we ask, if kings and queens cannot rest, what does that say about the weight of ruling? There was a time when sleep wasn't just rest, it was ritual. And for royalty, it was theater laced with fear. Take the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. They didn't just prepare for sleep, they rehearsed for death. The bed itself was a symbol often shaped like a lion, representing divine strength. And before lying down, many pharaohs followed a detailed sequence. Oils were rubbed into their skin, lotus, myrrh, and cedar, each meant to awaken different gods and dreams. Priests would stand in silence as protective spells were chanted around the sleeping chamber. On some nights, the pharaoh would sleep with a crook and flail across his chest, the symbols of kingship to ensure his soul remembered its duty even in the underworld. Because sleep, to the Egyptians, was a cousin of death. A temporary voyage through the Duat, the shadowy land of the dead. For a pharaoh, even unconsciousness had to be governed, and sometimes survived. In the Maya civilization, royal dreams were viewed as sacred texts. Kings and queens would drink a bitter cacao brew mixed with chili and hallucinogenic herbs before sleep. This wasn't for pleasure, it was to enter trance states. In those visions, they claimed to receive instructions from gods or ancestors. Their beds were often laid out in alignment with Venus or the moon. Entire palaces were designed so that moonlight would touch the sovereign's forehead just before dawn, a divine kiss. And if a ruler dreamed of blood, it was taken as a sign that sacrifice was required. So priests kept track. Dream journals were written on bark paper scrolls and stored like scripture. To be royal was to be watched by both worlds, awake or dreaming. But even in later centuries, some rulers believed that sleep itself could be manipulated. Take Frederick the Great of Prussia, a man of war and precision. He believed that dreams could be trained like a dog. He refused to sleep in total darkness, fearing the brain would wander. Instead, he had a special device installed in his chamber, a mirrored box with a single candle inside. The reflections multiplied the light, creating soft, flickering shapes on the ceiling. Every night, he'd stare at those illusions and repeat the same words in Latin. Ego sum imperator somnorum. I am the emperor of dreams. His aim wasn't rest, it was dominion. He believed that if he could master his mind during sleep, he could never be caught off guard in waking life. It sounds absurd, until you remember how much power he held, and how alone he truly was. But some rulers didn't even try to sleep peacefully. They turned bedtime into battlegrounds. Genghis Khan, conqueror of the steppes, never slept in the same place twice. His tent was moved in secret, sometimes several times a night. He believed spirits could track a man by his sleep. His bedroll was made from wolf skin, chosen for its fierce energy, and placed directly on the earth, no platform, no barrier. Before he lay down, he'd rub ash from the campfire onto his hands. Then he'd draw lines in the dirt around his body, whispering the names of ancestors to guard him. He told his sons, "A warrior sleeps only when the wind obeys him." Powerful men, still afraid of dreams. In France, King Louis XI carried superstition to extremes. He wore a necklace of tiny bones and amulets to bed, some taken from saints' tombs, others from executed criminals. He believed the mixture protected him from nightmares. His chamber was sealed tight each night, with holy water sprinkled at all corners. He often forced monks to chant through the night, rotating shifts so that silence never had time to enter. But despite all his efforts, he remained plagued by dreams of falling, over and over, through air, through fire, through silence. Each time he woke gasping, he demanded a new set of charms be placed under his mattress. He built a kingdom on order and cunning, but in sleep he was endlessly falling. And then there's the story of Queen Isabella of Castile. Her bed was a war camp. She often slept in her armor or with a blade within reach. Her chamber smelled of iron and candle smoke. She refused to sleep on soft pillows, saying softness made the mind weak. During the Reconquista, she kept vigil most nights, lighting candles at intervals to mark the hours. Yet beneath this warrior's shell was a woman haunted. In her later years, she had dreams of fire, cities burning, voices crying in unknown tongues. After the expulsion of the Moors and Jews, she reported waking up drenched in sweat, whispering words in languages she never learned. Her confessor told her it was divine punishment. She began sleeping on the floor. Guilt doesn't need a sword to cut deep. In the Palace of Versailles, beneath the gold and grandeur, a young boy once lay awake, terrified. The future Louis XV. As a child king, he was made to sleep alone in a vast chamber, its ceilings painted with scenes of war and judgment. Every creak of the floor, every flicker of candlelight made him tremble. Servants were forbidden from speaking unless addressed. And so he lay in silence night after night, afraid to close his eyes, afraid to be forgotten. It's said that in those early years, he developed the habit of sleeping with dolls, handmade, simple, quiet things. He named them after saints. He prayed to them, confided in them, and when they were taken away during his adolescence, he didn't sleep for 3 nights. Because even kings sometimes need comfort. The weirdest rituals weren't always grand. Sometimes they were small, intimate, heartbreaking, like Emperor Meiji of Japan, who slept with a poem under his pillow every night. He wrote one each day, always about the same themes: harmony, duty, loss. They weren't for public eyes. No one read them, but they gave him peace. And when he died, hundreds of tiny, folded slips of paper were found beneath his bed. A man who spoke little in public, pouring his soul into whispers on paper, night after night. Or Catherine the Great, who had a clock built that chimed not by hour, but by heartbeat. Before bed, she'd wind it, listen to the ticking, and try to sync her breath. She believed that when your heartbeat matched the rhythm of the world, sleep would come naturally. Some nights it worked, others it ticked like a countdown, and she would sit, unmoving, eyes open, waiting for her mind to quiet. It rarely did. In Persia, the Shahs often had sleeping platforms built high above the ground, accessible only by ladder. They believed the elevation brought them closer to the stars, closer to divine messages. Astrologers tracked planetary alignments before advising which night the Shah should dream for answers. And when those dreams came, scribes waited outside the door, ready to record every fragment upon waking. It wasn't sleep, it was prophecy. A nation held its breath on the dreams of one man. The weirdness of royal sleep isn't really in the feathers or perfumes or superstitions. It's in the loneliness, the pressure, the weight of being watched even by the stars. Because when a ruler closes their eyes, they don't just retreat from the world. They carry it with them, its fears, its hopes, its ghosts. And no matter how high the throne or how deep the vaults, the night asks the same question to all. Who are you when no one's watching? There was a peculiar king in Bavaria, Ludwig II, who was so terrified of reality that he turned sleep into a portal. He built castles not for war or rule, but for dreams. Neuschwanstein, perched on the edge of cliffs and fog, looked like it had fallen from a fairy tale, and that's exactly what he wanted. He didn't sleep at night, he reversed the hours. Daytime was for shadows. Nighttime was for wandering his candlelit halls alone, speaking to paintings, reading Wagner's operas aloud, imagining himself as a knight. When he did sleep, it was on a revolving bed, surrounded by murals of swans and angels, lit by glass chandeliers made to mimic starlight. His dreams weren't escapes, they were plans, alternate kingdoms, realities he believed in more than the one he ruled. People called him mad, but perhaps he was just mourning the world that never was. And still, even those who faced death with steel needed softness and sleep. Take Tokugawa Ieyasu, the shogun who unified Japan, a ruthless strategist, a man who crushed opposition with cold calculation. And yet, before sleep, he performed the same humble ritual every night. He wrote a single sentence about something he regretted that day, then folded the paper and placed it under his sleeping mat. He believed the body would absorb the lesson in dreams. He kept this up for 30 years. His final regret, written the night before he died, was simple. I did not laugh enough. Imagine that. A man who changed a nation, worrying he forgot how to smile. In England, King James I had a fear of witches. He wrote an entire book on demonology. And at night, he had his bed consecrated with oil, garlic cloves hidden in the posts, and iron scissors placed beneath his pillow in the shape of a cross. Every creak of the floorboards was examined. Every whisper of wind considered a curse. Sleep didn't come easy. He'd wake in sweats, convinced a specter had touched him. Once, he ordered an entire mattress burned because he saw a shadow move across it. Power had made him paranoid. Sleep made it worse. And in Ethiopia, long before modern medicine, emperors practiced a healing sleep called the lion's breath. It involved lying completely still for an hour while incense of frankincense and rue was burned, and the breath was guided in and out slowly through the nose, mimicking the rhythm of a lion sleeping beneath a tree. It wasn't just ritual, it was medicine, but the emperor had to remain utterly motionless. Any twitch was considered a sign of spiritual imbalance. A servant watched with closed eyes, counting the breath patterns in silence. Sounds peaceful, but in the silence, some emperors reported hearing whispers, ancient voices, or the regrets of their ancestors. You don't need noise to be haunted. In Renaissance Italy, the Medicis turned sleep into science. Cosimo de' Medici commissioned an alchemist to create the perfect sleeping potion, not to dull the senses, but to enhance dreams. It included saffron, crushed amethyst, and honey aged for 7 years. He believed that the future could be glimpsed through dreams, if the mind was clean enough. So every night, before drinking his dream elixir, Cosimo fasted. He read no letters, spoke to no one, and meditated on death. He claimed that, once, he saw his grandson's face in a dream 20 years before the child was born. Coincidence? Or prophecy disguised as sleep? Then there's Queen Christina of Sweden. She ruled like a storm, brilliant, erratic, unwilling to be boxed in. And at night, she slept surrounded by books. Literally, her bed was positioned inside a small private library, and before sleep, she would pull down volumes at random and read aloud until her voice gave out. But more curious, she refused to sleep under a ceiling. Even in winter, she insisted the chamber roof be removed or left unfinished. She claimed it made her feel too close to death, so she slept under the open stars, even in snow, wrapped in furs and surrounded by ink-stained pages. Power didn't tame her. It only made her stranger. And in the court of the Mongols, Kublai Khan had his own twilight rites. His chamber was a tent within a tent, layers of silk and felt, muffling all sound. And before bed, he would drink a fermented mare's milk and listen to epic poems sung by blind musicians. The stories were chosen by astrologers based on the movements of Mars and Mercury. It wasn't entertainment, it was guidance. The songs were maps, warnings, omens wrapped in rhythm. He believed the cadence of the music shaped the path of dreams. And if he woke in fear, the musicians would begin again. Night after night, music was his compass through the chaos of sleep. In modern times, such rituals may sound bizarre, but they echo something universal. Sleep is surrender, and when your life is one of absolute control, surrender is terrifying. So the royalty of the past did what they could. They filled their nights with incense, iron, silk, scripture, confessions, music, and magic. They turned their beds into fortresses, their pillows into shrines, their dreams into battlegrounds. Because the darkness held no loyalty. No army could protect you from what came after the candle went out. Even Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, feared sleep in her final years. She stayed awake for days at a time, pacing, refusing to lie down. Her doctors begged her. Her ladies pleaded. But she feared if she closed her eyes, she would not wake. And when she finally did rest, she insisted on lying on a pile of cushions on the floor. Not a bed. She died that way, a monarch who had ruled for 4 decades, ending her reign not in gold or glory, but in silent defiance of sleep. Because sleep, in the end, is the great equalizer. It doesn't care about bloodlines or crowns. It strips away the armor. It shows us who we really are. Centuries before sleep trackers and melatonin, emperors were already trying to outwit the night. In imperial China, the Tang dynasty emperors believed sleep was a bridge, not an end, not a pause, but a sacred link between realms. Before they slept, they performed elaborate tea rituals, using infusions not for taste but for balance. Chrysanthemum to quiet the mind, ginseng to steady the breath, lotus leaf to open the soul. These weren't simply herbs, they were keys. The emperor would be massaged with warm jade rollers, and a concubine might read poetry in soft cadence, not for pleasure, but to prepare the spirit for journey. Because dreams weren't just flickers of imagination. They were considered messages from the ancestors. And if an emperor failed to understand his dreams, he might mislead the nation. Which is why court astrologers waited each morning to analyze what he saw. And if he saw nothing, that was the worst omen of all. A dreamless night meant the world was turning its back. Far from Asia, in Tsarist Russia, Tsar Ivan the Terrible had nightmares that clawed into the walls. He believed ghosts of those he executed came to speak to him in sleep, to threaten him, to taunt him, and so he ordered that guards be stationed outside his bedchamber all night, holding candles and chanting prayers. Every hour, a priest would sprinkle holy water on the floorboards, but it didn't help. Ivan would scream in his sleep, wake covered in sweat, and then pace barefoot, whispering to shadows only he could see. One night, he demanded all mirrors be removed. "I no longer recognize the thing inside them," he said. He died years later after a nightmare. No poison, no assassin, just a scream and then silence. The mind, unguarded, can be a cruel executioner. But not all rulers feared the dark. Some embraced it. In ancient Korea, the royal bedchamber followed principles of geomancy, pangsuyuri. The bed had to face the perfect direction based on the ruler's birth elements. The walls were painted in colors designed to calm certain meridians in the body. Before bed, the monarch walked barefoot across heated stones infused with herbs, designed to pull negative fire from the body. Then, a royal healer would gently tap acupressure points along the back and head, not to treat illness, but to open the heavenly gate for dreams. Each detail was sacred, because if the gate didn't open, wisdom could not enter. And then there's the peculiar case of King Charles VI of France, known to history as Charles the Mad. He believed he was made of glass. Before sleeping, he would wrap his body in thick blankets and demand his attendants not come close, for fear they would shatter him. He refused to sleep unless a special wooden cage was placed over his bed to protect him from collisions. He once awoke in a rage, convinced his ribs had cracked in a dream. The doctors found nothing wrong, but he ordered a ceremony of healing anyway. Priests came, burned rosemary, and read scripture backwards until sunrise. His madness frightened his court, but maybe, in his own way, he was just trying to survive in a world that never felt safe. Not even within his own skin. And while his rituals were extreme, he wasn't alone in believing that the body could betray itself during sleep. In the Ottoman Empire, sultans believed in the idea of the shadow double, a spirit that left the body during sleep and could be stolen. So guards were not only placed around the physical chamber, but spiritual protection was required as well. Each sultan had a dream master, a kind of mystic counselor, who would place talismans beneath the pillow, some with verses from the Quran, others with astrological symbols or even strands of hair from a beloved. One sultan demanded that his pillow be filled with the down feathers of birds that had never flown. Flight, he said, tempted the soul to wander, so he grounded himself with innocence. Even in slumber, a ruler must remain anchored. In Hungary, King Matthias Corvinus employed a different tactic. He studied lucid dreaming. Yes, centuries before psychology named it, Matthias practiced it. Every evening, he read passages from ancient philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, Boethius, then repeated a mantra, "I am the watcher of my own world." He believed that in mastering dreams, one could glimpse a higher reality. He kept a dream codex, a bound volume filled with diagrams of dreamscapes, symbols, and decisions he made while sleeping. He once claimed he met a figure of light who warned him of a coming betrayal, and within months, one of his ministers turned traitor. Was it coincidence? Or did his kingdom extend beyond the waking world? And in the Indian courts, Mughal emperors practiced what was called moon bathing. Before sleep, they would lie beneath open skies, allowing the moonlight to wash over their bare chests. It was said to cool the fires of pride and passion. Their beds were infused with sandalwood and camphor. A servant would brush their hair with silver combs, and a poet would recite verses from Persian ghazals. But one emperor, Jahangir, believed more in silence. He dismissed the rituals, the perfumes, the poems. He preferred to lie still and listen, to the wind, to the distant howls of jungle dogs, to the movement of stars above. One night, he wrote in his journal, "Only in stillness do I feel like myself. The crown is loud, but the sky is quiet." His father ruled with grandeur. Jahangir ruled with awareness, and he slept like a monk among kings. There are patterns if you look closely. The deeper the power, the stranger the sleep, because no matter how gilded the crown, the night remains unknowable. And those who carry the weight of nations often carry fears too heavy for silence. They wrap themselves in rituals. They build barriers of perfume and prayer, of incense and iron, of stories and superstition. They try to tame the dark, but darkness has never been loyal to kings. In the royal palaces of Spain, the Habsburgs kept secrets even their servants didn't fully understand. Before bed, King Philip II would order his chamber darkened not with curtains, but with black velvet drapes that hung from the ceiling to the floor. Every crack was covered, every reflection banished. He believed that light, even starlight, invited demons to spy. But what made his ritual stranger was the silence. No one was permitted to speak in the royal quarters after dusk. Not a whisper, not a footstep, not even a cough. If a servant so much as cleared their throat, they could be dismissed. Philip believed words lingered. He believed a spoken phrase, even a harmless one, might echo in the mind and corrupt a dream. So he would sit in total darkness before sleep, often for hours, cross-legged on the floor, head bowed, sometimes praying, sometimes doing nothing at all. No one really knew what happened in those hours. Only that when he finally rose and climbed into bed, he looked paler, like something had been left behind in the shadows. Perhaps it had, but not all monarchs feared words. In ancient Persia, the Shahs used them like spells. Before bed, they would be read epic tales from the Shahnameh. Stories of dragons, warriors, betrayal, and destiny. These weren't lullabies. They were guides. The idea was simple. What you heard last before sleep shaped what you became in dreams. So they chose their stories like soldiers choose weapons. Courage before cowardice. Victory before fear. One particular Shah, K. Khosrow, became so obsessed with dreams that he ordered his court to record not only his, but the dreams of everyone in the palace. Each morning, scribes wrote them down, categorized them, cross-referenced them. If patterns emerged, he altered his policies. If someone dreamed of fire too often, they were reassigned. He once canceled a military campaign because 3 different concubines dreamt of crows in the same week. He believed dreams weren't signs of what would happen. He believed they were warnings of what was already true. In Africa, in the Ashanti Kingdom, kings slept on beds that were never allowed to touch the ground. Not for comfort, but because the earth was sacred. To sleep directly on it was to invite the spirits of the ancestors. And a king was not to be visited unless invited. So they built platforms, ornate golden thrones of sleep. Beneath them, pots of water and herbs would steam through vents, creating a sacred fog. Before sleep, the king would be anointed with shea oil and brushed with a fan made of eagle feathers. A priest would whisper the names of ancestors into his ears, not as prayers, but as reminders, because forgetting your lineage meant losing your right to rule. Even in dreams, a king must remember where he came from, and sometimes the bed itself became the ritual. Louis XIV, the Sun King of France, turned his sleep into a performance. Each night, up to 100 people gathered to watch him go to bed. It was called the coucher. Nobles jostled for the right to hand him his nightgown, to hold his candlestick, to draw his sheets. It wasn't private. It wasn't restful. It was political theater. But behind the ceremony, in his true private chambers, Louis had one strange condition. He had to be surrounded by ticking clocks. He couldn't sleep in silence. He said the ticking reminded him that time was still his. Even when resting, he needed to rule something. In contrast, in ancient Egypt, pharaohs slept in chambers designed to resemble tombs. Not for morbidity, but for transformation. The walls were painted with stars. The ceilings lined with verses from the Book of the Dead. Incense was burned to mimic the smell of sacred oils used in embalming. It was believed that in sleep, the pharaoh temporarily entered the underworld. So the goal was to prepare the soul nightly for that journey. He would be wrapped lightly in linen, not for warmth, but for symbolism, mimicking the shrouds he would wear in death. Guardians stood at the doors not with swords, but with hieroglyphs inscribed on papyrus scrolls, spells for protection. To sleep, for a pharaoh, was not to rest. It was to practice eternity. And in the Vatican, the Pope, who was also a monarch, had his own peculiar habits. Pope Pius IX, in the 19th century, refused to sleep unless the room contained a relic of a martyr, sometimes a bone fragment, sometimes a vial of dried blood. His favorite was a piece of the veil said to belong to Saint Veronica. He claimed it gave him peaceful dreams. He also slept in a bed purposely made smaller than his height, so his feet hung off the edge. Why? Because he said full comfort was a temptation, and a pope should never be tempted by ease. Even in sleep, he wore a hair shirt beneath his gown. Rest was a gift he believed had to be earned. Across the globe, the details differ, but the message is the same. For kings, queens, emperors, and popes, sleep was never just sleep. It was fear and control, mystery and mastery, surrender and strategy. And sometimes it was simply loneliness. Because when you rule a world no one else can touch, when you wear crowns that weigh more than gold, when every hour of your life is watched, judged, used, then the moment you lie down is the only time you're truly alone. No advisors, no armies, no flatterers, just silence. And maybe that's the scariest thing of all. In the courts of Japan's Heian period, royalty approached sleep as an art form. Not just a necessity, not even a luxury, but an aesthetic ritual that blended poetry, perfume, and philosophy. Emperors and noblewomen alike slept in rooms surrounded by screens, painted not with war or grandeur, but with nature. Cherry blossoms, cranes, drifting mist. These images weren't decorative. They were chosen to influence dreams, because in the Heian worldview, dreams were considered a form of emotional truth. Not prophecy, not madness, but the purest version of how one really felt. So every color, scent, and sound was curated for emotional balance. Incense was burned in waves, first aloes wood to calm, then clove to deepen the breath. Robes were chosen by texture and tone. Pale blue for humility, soft gold for courage, lavender for yearning. Even the bed was poetry. A thin mattress atop tatami, layered with silk and perfumed sheets. To modern eyes, it might seem uncomfortable, but it wasn't about comfort. It was about clarity. Clarity of body, clarity of heart, clarity of dreams. Before sleeping, court nobles often composed poems, not for others to hear, but to read silently, alone. A final mirror of the soul before the mind let go. One empress wrote, "The wind stirs the reeds, yet I cannot find their meaning. Perhaps the silence speaks." Sometimes silence was the ritual, but in Prussia, silence was the enemy. Frederick the Great, the Prussian king, was terrified of insomnia. He believed it weakened the soul, cracked the armor of the mind. So he waged war against it with military precision. Before bed, he drank a custom tonic made of valerian root, lavender water, and tiny shards of opium. Then he ordered a solo flute performance. No orchestra, no voice, just one flute played behind a curtain, so he wouldn't see the musician. He said seeing the face ruined the mystery, and he wanted his last emotion before sleep to be wonder. He kept a notebook beside his bed, not for writing dreams, but for recording ideas that came in the edge between sleep and waking. Some were brilliant, others were nonsense, but he believed that window held truths the day couldn't give him. "Only when I stopped trying to be a king," he once wrote, "do I remember I am a man," and in that moment he was more awake than ever. In medieval Ethiopia, the Solomonic emperors had rituals rooted in fire. Before sleeping, they sat before a small flame in a copper dish, not to warm themselves but to speak. They whispered their regrets into the fire, mistakes from the day, thoughts they should not have had, words they wished they could take back. The fire, they believed, consumed these flaws and carried them away. Then, and only then, could sleep be entered without burden. Because sleep, in their belief, was a meeting with God. And no one should come to that meeting dirty. Even the location mattered. The emperor's bedchamber was surrounded by water jars and planted reeds, to confuse spirits who might try to find him. The bed faced neither east nor west, but a calculated in-between, so no spirit from sunrise or sunset could claim him. Protection wasn't armor. It was geometry, smoke, and forgiveness. And sometimes protection was found in the strangest things. Catherine de' Medici, Queen of France, refused to sleep without her collection of gemstone amulets. She had dozens, each believed to channel a different power. Lapis lazuli to protect the mind, bloodstone to prevent nightmares, amethyst to purify her thoughts. But the strangest was a polished black onyx. She believed it stored the emotions of those who came near. Each night, She would hold it in her palm and whisper the names of those she suspected of betrayal. Then she'd place it beside her on the pillow. If she dreamt of blood, she took it as a warning. The next morning, someone's fate would change, sometimes dramatically. In the British Isles, the Tudors had their own way of preparing for slumber. Henry VIII, notorious for his appetites, had a surprisingly delicate bedtime ritual. He couldn't fall asleep without music, but not just any music. It had to be a lullaby sung in Welsh, a language he didn't fully understand. Why? He said hearing words he couldn't translate reminded him of the womb. He would also insist that a candle remain lit, always, even when he slept. When asked why, he once said, "Darkness whispers. I prefer it not to speak." Ironically, it was during sleep that he made some of his most impulsive decisions. More than one execution was ordered based on a feeling he awoke with. Imagine that, lives rising and falling on the tides of a king's dreams. But sometimes rulers didn't dream, or rather, they chose not to. Napoleon Bonaparte famously slept very little. He believed excessive sleep dulled ambition. He claimed he trained himself to fall asleep instantly, anywhere, for short bursts. Before battle, he'd lie down fully dressed, close his eyes, and drop into a kind of power slumber. 10, 15 minutes, and awaken sharper than before. He had no bedtime rituals, no incense, no poetry, no prayer, just war maps at the foot of the bed. He said, "If I sleep long, I forget my purpose. I do not wish to forget." But others did. Some sought sleep not to remember, but to escape. Queen Christina of Sweden slept beneath ceilings covered in mirrors, not to admire herself, but to remind her every night of mortality. She believed mirrors reflected not just faces, but decay, age, truth. Before sleep, she stared upward, watching her own expression flicker in candlelight until it no longer seemed her own. She never married, never wore dresses, and said once, "I sleep not to rest, but to disappear." Sleep as a rehearsal for vanishing. And in many ways, for royalty, that's exactly what it was. A nightly vanishing, from expectations, from duty, from the illusion of control. Because in sleep, even kings are nothing more than wanderers in a world without crowns. In the icy courts of Imperial Russia, the bedtime rituals of the Romanovs took on a different kind of weight, emotional, mystical, and often haunting. Tsar Nicholas II had a habit that puzzled even his closest attendants. Before bed, he would walk barefoot through his private chapel, no matter the season, no matter the cold. He believed physical discomfort purified the soul. He would pause at each icon, touch the frame, and whisper a line of prayer, never the same one twice. Then he would kneel for exactly 7 minutes in silence, his eyes closed, his breath shallow. He said it was the only time he didn't feel like a czar, only a man. When he finally retired to bed, he required 2 things: a cross under his pillow and a sealed letter he had written to himself. The letter changed daily. No one ever read them, but each morning he burned the previous night's letter, unread, in a silver bowl. One servant once asked why. Nicholas answered, "Because even a king has thoughts he must never keep." His wife, Tsarina Alexandra, had stranger habits still. She believed that dreams could be infected by envy, by fear, by gossip whispered during the day. So before sleep, she passed her hands over her children's foreheads and muttered protective verses in a blend of Russian, German, and Church Slavonic. It was neither a spell nor a prayer. It was a ritual of memory, words her mother had once whispered to her. She insisted the children wear sleep gowns embroidered with protective sigils, some Christian, others drawn from older, forgotten beliefs. When Rasputin entered their lives, he added his own twist to the routine. He instructed Alexandra to place a teaspoon of honey under each child's tongue before bed, claiming it would sweeten their souls and shield their spirits. Whether it worked or not, no one could say. But the palace was rarely silent again after that. In China's Forbidden City, sleep was strategic. The emperor never slept in the same bed 2 nights in a row. Not because he couldn't, but because he must not. It was a matter of survival. Assassination was always a risk. even within the red lacquered walls of the palace. So the emperor's chamber was surrounded by identical rooms, each equally ornate, each indistinguishable in its luxury. Each night, he would disappear into one, accompanied by only a single eunuch sworn to silence. The next night, a different room, a different path. No patterns, no habits, only unpredictability. But there was one ritual he never skipped. Before sleep, the emperor would sip a special tea made of chrysanthemum petals, goji berries, and crushed pearl. It was believed to calm the mind and enhance inner vision. He would then write a single character on silk, Jing, meaning stillness, then burn it, symbolizing the death of all thoughts before rest. The empress, meanwhile, had her own customs. Before sleep, she was bathed in water infused with camellia blossoms and jade dust. Her attendants brushed her hair exactly 100 times, no more, no less. But the strangest part? She slept on a bed of bamboo, slightly tilted, so her head remained elevated and her body cool. Not for comfort, but to preserve beauty, because in her mind, even while asleep, a royal woman must never appear mortal. She must always seem untouchable. In the Zulu kingdom, King Shaka Zulu treated sleep as a tactical retreat. Rare, earned, dangerous. He believed rest weakened a warrior's edge. So he only allowed himself to sleep after battle, and even then, only briefly. But when he did sleep, it was never alone. He surrounded himself with veteran warriors, not just for protection, but for shared dreaming. They would lie in a circle around a small fire, and as they drifted into sleep, they would chant a low hum, a tone that resonated in the chest more than the ears. They believed it connected them in spirit, and that through the dream, they could scout, speak, and even fight together in visions. What's astonishing is that many claimed to see the same things, same enemies, same symbols, same landscapes, and Shaka believed that was no coincidence. He believed the battlefield extended beyond the physical. And if so, then sleep was not escape. It was reconnaissance. In the Ottoman Empire, the Sultan's bedtime rituals were deeply tied to the architecture of power. The Sultan's bedchamber was the most fortified room in the palace, with thick stone walls, hidden passageways, and layers of guards. Yet, oddly, the Sultan rarely slept in the center of his own bed. He slept at the edge. Why? Because he feared comfort would dull his reflexes. He trained himself to wake at the slightest sound, to move silently in the dark, to draw a blade in silence. But his strangest ritual was auditory. Each night, a musician played a ney flute, its eerie, breathy tones echoing softly through the corridors. It was meant to mimic the soul's longing for union with the divine. But also, it served another purpose. The Sultan used the melody as a mental anchor. He claimed that as long as he could hear it, even faintly, he could find his way back from any dream. It was, in a sense, a lifeline, an invisible rope from the world of sleep back to the world of rule. And for a man who held the fates of millions in his hand, that lifeline was priceless. In Hawaii, the Alii Nui, the high chiefs, treated sleep as a sacred transition. Before rest, they would undergo a ritual known as mo kapu, a spiritual cleansing. A kahuna, or priest, would chant softly, asking the ancestors for permission to let the chief's spirit wander safely. Because in Polynesian tradition, sleep was not passive. It was a journey. The soul left the body, traveled the sea of dreams, spoke to the dead. So the body had to be guarded, not just from men, but from wandering spirits. The chief's chamber was circled with stones blessed by kahuna. No iron was permitted inside, as it was believed to disturb the spirit's return. And when the chief awoke, he was silent for the first hour. No decisions, no commands, because his soul, they believed, had not fully returned. And speaking too soon might shatter its memory of where it had been. Royalty, it seems, carried burdens even into their dreams. Power is rarely put down, even when the eyes are closed. Even in the moments of quietest stillness, something always watches, always calculates, always defends. A crown, after all, has no off switch. It glows in the dark. In the grand palaces of the Ottoman Empire, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent's bedtime was a mixture of mystery and meticulous ritual that few outsiders ever glimpsed. While the world outside buzzed with politics, war, and diplomacy, inside the walls of Topkapi Palace, the Sultan's evenings were filled with a strange mix of devotion and paranoia. Before sleep, Suleiman would recite long prayers in Arabic, not just any prayers but verses he memorized as a child. They were meant to shield him from evil spirits, but they also served as a meditation, a way to clear his mind of the day's worries. Yet, Suleiman was not content with words alone. His chamber was filled with a peculiar collection of objects: scarabs from Egypt, fragments of coral from the Red Sea, and carved wooden talismans from distant lands. He believed that each object held a protective spirit. Before lying down, he would carefully arrange these items in a precise pattern around his bed, forming an invisible shield. No servant was allowed to enter or move anything after the ritual. But Suleiman's most unusual habit was his refusal to touch the sheets before midnight. He claimed the bed had to be awake before he joined it. The bed was more than furniture. It was a living entity. He would spend hours before it, stroking the linens lightly, whispering promises of rest, until he felt the bed accept him. Then, and only then, would he sleep. Across the continent, in the bustling courts of the Mughal Empire, Emperor Akbar's nighttime rituals blended spirituality with intellectual curiosity. Akbar was fascinated by dreams. He kept a vast dream diary, recording not only his own visions but also those of his courtiers. Before sleep, he often engaged in deep philosophical discussions about fate, destiny, and the soul's journey. He believed the mind needed to be nourished before sleep, much like the body. One evening, Akbar shared with his closest advisor a strange theory: that sleep was a form of death, but with memory; that dreams were messages from a realm beyond time. So he devised a ritual to prepare the soul for these journeys. Before bed, Akbar would sit quietly in his private garden, inhaling the scent of jasmine and sandalwood. He would then drink a special concoction made from saffron and rose petals, known to induce vivid dreams. Sometimes, he would request a firefly cage be brought to his room so he could watch the flickering light. He said it reminded him of the soul's fragile dance between light and dark. In the Aztec Empire, the Huitzilopochtli, the great speaker or emperor, had a far more intense bedtime routine. The night before battle, sleep was forbidden. The emperor would spend the night in fasting, prayer, and ritual sacrifice. But on normal nights, his bedchamber was unlike any other. Walls adorned with serpents and jaguars, symbols of power and protection. Before sleep, the emperor would dip his fingers into a bowl of pulque, a fermented drink, and anoint his forehead and wrists. This was not merely symbolic. The pulque was believed to ward off evil spirits and purify the body. Then, the emperor would be wrapped in a blanket woven from the feathers of the quetzal bird. Its iridescent green and blue feathers were sacred. They represented the link between the earthly and divine. As he drifted to sleep, the emperor would listen to a chorus of priests chanting in the temple. These sounds created a bridge between worlds. It was believed that through this ritual, the emperor's soul could travel safely and return with wisdom. In contrast, the ancient kings of Scandinavia had more brutal and pragmatic nighttime rituals. Vikings and Norse kings saw sleep as a vulnerability. But rest was necessary, so they trained themselves to fall asleep quickly and lightly. Before bed, they would drink a mixture of mead and herbs, some for relaxation, others to dull pain from wounds. They kept their weapons close, and some even slept with one eye open. The king's bed was often raised off the floor on platforms made of animal skins, not just for warmth but to keep the sleeper alert to any movement. Some legends tell of kings who were awakened by the slightest sound and killed assassins before they could strike. Sleep for them was a battlefield, and sometimes even death was welcome. King Harald Hardrada, a legendary Norwegian ruler, reportedly said on his deathbed, "Better to die awake than sleep forever." This mindset permeated how Norse kings approached sleep, as a temporary surrender, never permanent. In ancient Korea, during the Joseon dynasty, kings had complex sleep customs deeply intertwined with Confucian values. Sleep was a time for reflection and balance. Before bed, kings would perform a short ritual cleansing, washing hands and face in cold water to purify the body and mind. They would then write poetry or reflect on the day's moral lessons. Sleep was seen as a bridge between yin and yang, between activity and rest, light and shadow. The bed was often placed facing north, considered the most auspicious direction. Kings were careful about the fabrics and colors they used, soft blues and greens to calm the spirit. Even the number of pillows mattered, an odd number symbolizing growth and energy. And like many other monarchs, Korean kings believed sleep was vulnerable to evil spirits, so they had talismans sewn into their bedding. Often, these were embroidered with dragons, phoenixes, or protective scripts. One tale tells of a king who dreamed he was attacked by shadowy figures. He awoke, found a tear in his bedding where a talisman had been sewn, and declared it had saved his life. In the courts of the Byzantine Empire, emperors treated bedtime as an exercise in control and pageantry. Before sleep, the emperor was bathed by eunuchs in rose water and oils infused with myrrh. This was not merely indulgence. It was symbolic purification, a daily rebirth. The emperor's nightshirt was embroidered with gold thread and precious stones. He slept on a bed carved with scenes from classical mythology. But behind the ceremony was a more personal obsession. Emperor Justinian I, one of Byzantium's greatest rulers, feared being poisoned in his sleep. So he mandated that no one could enter his chamber after nightfall. Even his closest advisors waited outside, listening for his breathing. Some say he slept with a dagger under his pillow. Others say he slept with a slave tasked with waking him if anything disturbed the night. In this world of suspicion, sleep was a battlefield of its own. And yet, the emperor insisted on a final ritual. Before closing his eyes, he would recite the Nicene Creed aloud, as if armor made of words could protect him from the darkness. Sleep for Justinian was not a refuge. It was a calculated risk. In ancient Mesopotamia, kings believed their dreams were messages from the gods. They kept detailed dream logs and consulted priests who specialized in dream interpretation. Before sleep, the king would be anointed with oils made from cedar and myrrh, believed to open the mind to divine communication. His chamber was decorated with symbols of protection: lions, bulls, and the winged sun disk. But sleep was also a political tool. If a king had a bad dream, advisors would interpret it as a warning. Sometimes, the king would delay decisions or cancel events based on these visions. In some cases, dreams foretold the downfall of rulers. One story tells of King Sargon II, who dreamt of his palace in flames. Days later, he was assassinated. For kings of Mesopotamia, sleep was never just rest. It was a direct line to the will of the gods. And in that connection lay both power and peril. From Europe to Asia, from Africa to the Americas, royalty shared a secret. Sleep was a stage where their true struggles played out. The battle between control and surrender, power and vulnerability. Where the weight of a crown pressed hardest. Where fears and hopes mingled in shadows. And where, sometimes, the weirdest rituals emerged, not because they were absurd, but because they were human. Because beneath the layers of silk and gold, beneath the titles and thrones, kings and queens faced the same darkness as the rest of us. Only theirs was wrapped in mystery and legend. And that is what makes their bedtime rituals so hauntingly fascinating. Sleep was never just an end of day. It was the final act in a long, dangerous play. And sometimes the strangest things they did before bed were their way of holding on to power, even when everything else was slipping away. In the dusty corridors of ancient Egypt, the pharaoh's bedtime was as much a spiritual journey as a physical necessity. The Nile's life-giving waters faded into the darkness, but the rituals within the palace only deepened. Pharaohs believed that sleep was the moment their soul, the Ba, could leave the body and travel to the afterlife. But this journey was perilous. The soul could be lost, trapped, or attacked by malevolent spirits lurking in the shadowy realms. To protect the pharaoh, priests performed elaborate ceremonies each evening. Before he could rest, The pharaoh had to be purified in scented waters infused with lotus and myrrh. Then, anointed with oils sacred to the gods. Each stroke was accompanied by whispered prayers to Osiris and Anubis, gods of the dead and afterlife. The pharaoh's bed was no ordinary place. It was a carved shrine, adorned with symbols of protection, winged scarabs, the eye of Horus, and depictions of the sun god Ra journeying across the sky. On the headboard, a tiny statue of Bes, the dwarf god protector of households and childbirth, watched over him. Pharaohs were believed to be living gods, and even in sleep, they carried divine power. Before lying down, the pharaoh's lips would utter a sacred incantation to call the Ka, or life force, to stay close and guide him safely through the night. But the pharaoh's bedtime held darker secrets. It was said that some rulers required human attendants to sleep nearby, sometimes slaves or prisoners, offering their own spirits as shields. Stories tell of kings who demanded their servants to share their chamber, to confuse evil spirits seeking the true royal soul. Others believed the pharaoh's sleep was haunted by the spirits of enemies, restless and vengeful. To ward off these forces, the pharaoh would wear a ring etched with hieroglyphs meant to bind spirits and confuse demons. One famous tale recounts Pharaoh Tutankhamun, the boy king, whose tomb was found with a gold mask bearing an inscription warning against disturbing his rest. Whether myth or reality, the message was clear. Even in sleep, the pharaoh's rest was sacred and fiercely protected. Moving westward, in the medieval courts of Europe, kings and queens lived in drafty castles, far from the warmth of tropical lands. Their bedtime rituals mixed practicality with superstition. In the chill of stone walls, fire was essential, but so was security. Kings often slept with a trusted guard nearby, a sharp blade within arm's reach. Medieval monarchs believed that evil spirits, witches, and even demons prowled the night, seeking to steal their souls. To protect themselves, many kings hung garlic or herbs like rosemary and sage around their beds. Some would sprinkle holy water on their sheets before sleep. Queen Elizabeth I, known for her strong will and sharp mind, had a particularly odd bedtime habit. She required a chamber pot filled with fresh rosewater placed at her bedside, not just for comfort but as a kind of aromatic shield. She believed the scent of roses purified the air and kept bad dreams at bay. Her ladies-in-waiting would also perform a peculiar ritual, stroking her hair precisely 100 times to ensure peaceful sleep. And Elizabeth rarely slept alone. She preferred to have her counselors and trusted servants in the chamber, a constant reminder of the ever-watchful eyes on her reign. Sleep, for her, was a battlefield of thoughts and schemes. She claimed she could never truly rest until the kingdom was safe. Meanwhile, in the courts of Japan during the Heian period, emperors and aristocrats lived lives steeped in ritual and poetry, even at night. Sleep was not just rest, but a carefully orchestrated ceremony. The emperor's bedroom was filled with sliding screens painted with seasonal flowers and landscapes, meant to calm the mind. Before sleep, the emperor would write a short poem, a waka reflecting on the day's emotions. This act was believed to soothe the soul and prepare it for dreams. A key part of bedtime was the lighting of incense, often sandalwood or cinnamon. The subtle smoke was thought to purify the air and invite pleasant dreams. But what's remarkable is the use of night guards, attendants trained to interpret the emperor's sleep. They watched his breathing patterns, recorded any muttering, and took note of sudden movements. If the emperor's sleep was troubled, they would report it, and court physicians might be summoned. Sleep disturbances were seen as omens of illness or political upheaval. The emperor's dreams could shape policy, and sometimes a single restless night could alter the course of history. In the highlands of Tibet, the Dalai Lama's approach to sleep reflected deep Buddhist philosophy. Sleep was a form of meditation, a brief death, and a preparation for enlightenment. Before bed, the Dalai Lama performed a ritual cleansing, washing his face and hands in cold water. Then, he would meditate quietly, focusing on compassion and detachment. Unlike many monarchs who sought comfort, the Dalai Lama often slept on a simple mat, embracing discomfort to train the mind. His attendants would recite prayers or chant mantras softly to aid his transition into sleep. One striking aspect was his approach to dreams. In Tibetan Buddhism, dreams are opportunities for insight. The Dalai Lama kept dream journals, analyzing symbols to guide his spiritual path. He believed lucid dreaming was a skill to cultivate, an extension of mindfulness. So before sleep, he would visualize himself as a bodhisattva, a being dedicated to helping others. This mental preparation shaped his dreams and, by extension, his waking wisdom. In the heart of West Africa, the Ashanti kings had bedtime rituals that connected the material and spiritual worlds. The Ashanti believed their rulers were semi-divine and that their spirits guarded the entire kingdom. Before rest, the king was bathed in palm oil infused with sacred herbs. The smell was strong, earthy, and believed to ward off evil spirits. The king's sleeping mat was woven from silk and placed atop layers of palm fronds, each layer symbolizing protection. One unique ritual was the burning of sacred incense made from frankincense and myrrh. The smoke was thought to carry prayers to the ancestors and protect the king during his spiritual journeys. But perhaps the most curious practice was the king's dream sharing. Each morning, he would recount his dreams to trusted priests and advisors. Dreams were believed to be messages from the ancestors, warning of threats or guiding decisions. In some cases, the king's nightmares led to preemptive action, sending scouts or reinforcing defenses. Sleep was a meeting place between worlds, a place where leadership was tested beyond the physical realm. This sense of connection, of bridging life and spirit, echoes through so many royal traditions. From ancient Egypt's divine pharaohs to Tibet's spiritual leaders, from European monarchs steeped in superstition to African kings carrying the weight of ancestors, the rituals before sleep tell a story beyond luxury or eccentricity. They reveal how power is never fully laid down. It lingers in breath, in shadow, in the last thoughts before darkness. They show us that sleep is not just an end, but a beginning. A time when the mind, the soul, and the body enter a fragile balance. And that even the mightiest rulers sought ways, strange, beautiful, sometimes terrifying, to protect that balance. Because the night is the great equalizer. It demands vulnerability, and yet it also holds the promise of renewal. The strangest things royalty did before bed were their ways of navigating this delicate dance, holding on to power even when letting go, transforming fear into ritual, and finding, in their unique customs, a mirror of their humanity. In the lavish courts of Renaissance Italy, sleep was a stage where art, science, and superstition collided. The Medici family, patrons of the arts and masters of political intrigue, viewed bedtime as a moment both intimate and strategic. Cosimo de' Medici, the family's patriarch, believed that dreams held secrets to the future. Before sleep, he would commission his personal astrologer to cast charts and interpret planetary alignments that might affect his night. The bedroom itself was no mere chamber but a curated gallery of symbols designed to influence dreams. Paintings of mythological gods and heroes adorned the walls, meant to inspire courage and wisdom even in sleep. Candles scented with lavender and rosemary burned low, their flickering light dancing like spirits guarding the night. But Cosimo's most unusual habit was his nightly ritual of writing to the stars. He kept a small journal at his bedside and would pen thoughts, worries, and hopes before closing his eyes. This practice was both cathartic and a form of subconscious preparation, an ancient form of cognitive therapy. His grandson, Lorenzo the Magnificent, took these bedtime rituals even further. Lorenzo was known to host midnight gatherings where poets, musicians, and philosophers debated in dim candlelight until dawn. Sleep was delayed, but when it came, it was enveloped in a web of stories and ideas, fueling his creative genius. Yet, Lorenzo was also plagued by nightmares. He believed these were messages from the gods warning him of political betrayal. To combat these visions, he had his bed draped with protective fabrics embroidered with saints and angels. Before sleep, he would drink a mixture of honey and crushed herbs believed to calm the mind. Despite all these efforts, Lorenzo often described his nights as a battlefield of dreams. This tension between inspiration and fear, between control and surrender, echoes through royal bedtime rituals across cultures. In Imperial Russia, the Tsars took bedtime as seriously as their crowns. Peter the Great, a man obsessed with modernization and control, approached sleep with both pragmatism and superstition. He reportedly slept only 4 to 5 hours a night, believing that too much sleep was a sign of weakness. Before bed, he would inspect his weapons and review state affairs, refusing to disengage entirely. Yet, he was also deeply afraid of poison, especially in his nighttime wine. To counteract this, Peter employed complex rituals. His wine was tasted by multiple servants, his bed chambers locked down, and a chamber pot placed strategically nearby to detect any foul liquids. His attendants slept in shifts, watching over him, ensuring no harm came in the dark. Peter also used herbal infusions like valerian root to calm his nerves before sleep. But one of his oddest practices was sleeping with a live animal, often a dog, to provide warmth and companionship. He believed this brought comfort and protection, a living guardian against both physical and spiritual threats. His son, Tsar Nicholas II, inherited this blend of superstition and modernity. Nicholas, plagued by anxiety and political turmoil, sought refuge in prayer before bed. He carried with him small icons of saints and would kiss them carefully, invoking protection. His wife, Alexandra, was fascinated by mysticism and often consulted the mystic Rasputin for guidance on sleep and health. The Tsar's bedtime was steeped in religious ritual but shadowed by fear. The idea that sleep could be invaded by dark forces was never far from their minds. In distant Japan, during the Edo period, shoguns approached sleep with a disciplined austerity reflecting their warrior ethos. For samurai rulers, sleep was both a necessity and a vulnerability to be minimized. They developed techniques to fall asleep instantly and awaken quickly. Before bed, the shogun might practice meditation to clear the mind, focusing on breath and posture. The bedroom was stark, minimal furnishings, a futon on polished wooden floors. Unlike European monarchs who draped their beds in luxury, Japanese rulers sought simplicity to foster mental clarity. Yet, even here, ritual was essential. The shogun's attendants would prepare the room by carefully arranging incense and lighting oil lamps in a precise sequence. This wasn't just for ambience, it was believed to align the room's energy and invite peaceful rest. In some cases, shoguns would sleep with their swords nearby, ready for any sudden threat. But what truly set Japanese royal bedtime apart was the practice of night visions. Shoguns kept dream journals and used dreams to make decisions about governance and warfare. Dreams were interpreted by monks and advisors skilled in symbolism and prophecy. One famous shogun reportedly woke from a nightmare predicting a betrayal only to uncover a plot against him the next day. This intersection of discipline, spirituality, and vigilance reveals how royal sleep was never simply sleep. It was always preparation, preparing for the dawn, for challenges, for power's fragile hold. In the American continent, the Inca rulers held a mystical view of sleep. They believed that the soul had multiple parts, and during sleep, one part journeyed into the spiritual realm. To protect the Sapa Inca, the emperor, from losing his soul, shamans performed nightly rituals involving music, chanting, and incense. The emperor's bedroom was filled with golden artifacts, symbolizing the sun god Inti. Before bed, the Sapa Inca would bathe in cold water from sacred springs, a ritual cleansing to separate the physical from the spiritual. He would then wear ceremonial robes embroidered with symbols of the cosmos. In some accounts, the emperor's chamber was built on sacred ground, aligned with astronomical events. This connection ensured his dreams aligned with divine will. One chilling legend says that if the emperor's sleep was disturbed, it signaled impending disaster for the empire. Therefore, attendants were vigilant, waking the emperor at the slightest sign of unrest. These traditions emphasize sleep's political importance. Not just rest, but a time when rulers' souls connected with gods, ancestors, and cosmic forces. The rituals serve to keep that connection strong and safe. As we reflect on these varied, strange, and profound royal bedtime rituals, a common thread emerges. Despite differences in culture, era, and belief, kings and queens wrestled with the same paradox: power demands strength, but strength requires rest. Yet sleep itself is vulnerability, the moment when control slips. The weird rituals, the prayers, the protective charms, the attendants watching in the dark, all are attempts to reclaim control in surrender. To wrest safety from a dangerous unknown. To keep the soul intact when the body sleeps. These practices invite us to consider our own relationship with rest. How often do we lie awake, wrestling with fears or hopes? How do we prepare ourselves for the unknown of the night? Royalty's strange bedtime habits remind us that sleep is more than biology. It's a story we tell ourselves about safety, power, and the fragile balance between them. And in that story, no matter who we are, we find a reflection of our deepest human truths. The Ottoman sultans, rulers of an empire that stretched across continents, carried bedtime rituals shaped by both Islamic tradition and imperial grandeur. Sleep was seen as a sacred pause, a chance to cleanse the soul and renew strength for the burdens of leadership. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, known for his sharp mind and military prowess, held deep respect for the night's power. Before sleep, he would perform ablutions, ritual washings, washing his hands, face, and feet 3 times while reciting prayers to cleanse both body and spirit. His bedroom was richly decorated with silk tapestries and cushions, but even in luxury, humility was key. The Sultan would lay his head on a pillow embroidered with verses from the Quran, reminding himself of divine guidance even in rest. One fascinating custom involved the use of a dream pillow, a small pouch filled with herbs like mint, lavender, and rose petals, believed to bring good dreams and protect against nightmares. Suleiman's sleep was never solitary. A trusted eunuch or guard would remain close, both for protection and to serve as a witness to any unusual dreams or omens. In Ottoman culture, dreams were messages from Allah, and the Sultan's dreams held significance for the empire's fate. The Sultan's personal dream interpreter played a vital role, analyzing visions and advising on state matters based on these nocturnal revelations. Yet, sleep was not always peaceful. Suleiman was said to be haunted by the memory of battles and betrayals. To calm his restless mind, he would sometimes recite poetry by the great Persian poet Hafez, whose verses spoke of love, loss, and the transient nature of life. These words served as a meditation, allowing the Sultan to navigate the complex emotional landscape before surrendering to sleep. Far to the north, in the Viking courts, kings faced the cold darkness with rugged pragmatism. Sleep was less about ritual and more about survival. In longhouses filled with smoke and the scent of burning wood, the Viking king's bed was a simple pallet of furs and straw. But even here, strange customs surrounded bedtime. Kings would drink a special mead infused with herbs like valerian and hops, intended to soothe nerves and promote restful sleep. Before lying down, the king's warriors would gather to tell stories of valor and honor, creating a protective atmosphere woven from memory and loyalty. Some tales warned that the king's dreams were visited by Valkyries, female spirits who decided which warriors would live or die. The king's sleep was a time when fate itself seemed close, a fragile moment between worlds. This belief led to the practice of dream watches, where trusted men stayed awake to interpret any signs from the king's slumber. If the king awoke startled or shouting, it was taken as a message, sometimes a warning of battle, sometimes a sign to honor the gods. These traditions reveal how sleep and leadership intertwined in the harshest environments. In the Islamic Golden Age, the caliphs of Baghdad surrounded themselves with scholars and mystics, blending science with spirituality. Sleep was considered both a necessity and a divine gift. Caliph Harun al-Rashid was said to have a bedtime routine that included reading poetry, drinking a calming brew of saffron and rosewater, and listening to soft music played on the oud. His chamber was perfumed with frankincense and myrrh, creating an atmosphere of tranquility. One curious practice was the use of dream catchers. Long before they became known in other cultures, delicate nets hung near the bed designed to trap bad dreams and allow only good ones to pass. Harun's court was famous for interpreting dreams, using them to guide decisions on everything from governance to personal affairs. Dream interpreters, known as mufassir, were highly respected and often consulted first thing in the morning. Harun himself believed that sleep was a form of divine communication, a way for Allah to send guidance. This elevated the act of sleep from mere rest to sacred dialogue. In the vast Mongol Empire, Genghis Khan's approach to sleep was rooted in the brutal realities of conquest. Sleep was a precious commodity, often stolen between campaigns. The great Khan believed in training his body to function on little sleep, preparing for the demands of battle and leadership. But even in his harsh lifestyle, rituals were important. Before sleep, Genghis Khan would perform a short prayer to Tinri, the sky god, asking for protection and strength. He also maintained a simple but significant practice, wearing a talisman carved from bone or stone, believed to carry the power of ancestors. The Khan's bed was minimal, a simple hide laid on the ground, but the presence of these talismans created a sense of spiritual armor. In camp, guards were always posted, ensuring that no enemy or spirit could disturb the Khan's rest. His sleep was said to be deep but brief, often interrupted by visions that he interpreted as warnings or guidance. These nocturnal experiences shaped his decisions and strategies. The strange bedtimes of royalty across the world and history speak to something universal, the fragile line between vulnerability and power. Despite unimaginable wealth and influence, kings and queens faced the same fears that haunt us all in the dark. They sought to protect their bodies, their souls, and their legacies from the unknown threats that lurk in sleep. Their rituals may seem odd to us now, wearing protective charms, calling on gods, analyzing dreams, but they reveal a profound human need. The need to find safety when everything feels uncertain. The need to believe in something greater than ourselves. And the need to face the night with courage, no matter the cost. In a way, these strange practices are mirrors held up across centuries, showing us how the mighty wrestled with the same darkness we do. As you lie awake tonight, remember this: you are connected to a long line of rulers who battled the night with ritual and resolve. And in that, there is a strange comfort. The night belongs to all of us, kings and commoners alike. Sleep for royalty was never just a biological need, it was a battleground of fears, hopes, and power. Across continents and centuries, monarchs transformed the act of going to bed into a complex ritual, a final act of control before surrendering to vulnerability. Take Queen Elizabeth I of England, for instance. Known for her iron will and sharp intellect, Elizabeth's bedtime was surrounded by paradox. On one hand, she was meticulous about her nightly routine, a warm bath infused with herbs, the careful selection of nightclothes, and a chamber filled with familiar comforts. On the other hand, her fear of assassination extended even into the bedroom. She demanded that multiple attendants remain nearby, ready to act at the slightest threat. Elizabeth also carried with her a tiny, hidden dagger. The Queen was famous for her refusal to be defenseless, even in sleep. But her strange ritual went deeper. She would often spend hours before sleep writing letters, dictating state affairs, or reflecting on her enemies. Her mind refused to rest easily, caught between the weight of ruling and the need to find peace. The loneliness of power haunted her nights. She confessed in letters to trusted advisors that sleep felt like a thin veil between her and danger. That veil was pierced often by nightmares, visions of betrayal, plots, and loss. To combat this, Elizabeth relied on prayer, music, and sometimes the counsel of astrologers who read the stars for guidance on her dreams. Contrast this with the Sun King, Louis XIV of France, who turned bedtime into a public spectacle. The king's nightly routine was part theater, part control ritual. Courtiers vied for the honor of attending le coucher du roi, the king's ceremonial bedtime. The ritual involved multiple layers: a ceremonial undressing, prayers, and the lighting of lamps by favored nobles. Louis believed that the rituals reinforced his divine right to rule. The elaborate ceremony was a reminder to all present that even in sleep, the king's power was absolute. He also employed music, reading, and scent, using lavender and orange blossom to calm his mind. But underneath this grand display was a man battling insomnia and anxiety, afraid that restlessness might betray weakness. Across the globe, in ancient China, the emperors of the Ming dynasty viewed sleep through the lens of harmony and balance. The emperor's bedroom was a sanctuary, meticulously arranged according to feng shui principles. Every element, the position of the bed, the choice of fabrics, even the timing of sleep, was designed to align with cosmic energy. Before sleep, the emperor engaged in a ritual of quiet meditation and breathing exercises, preparing body and mind to merge with the universe's rhythms. He also drank herbal teas made from rare plants believed to enhance longevity and spiritual clarity. The emperor's attendants kept detailed records of his dreams, interpreting them as signs from ancestors and celestial forces. A disturbed sleep was considered an ominous warning, triggering immediate consultations with court shamans. Yet, no matter how controlled or sacred, sleep was always a site of vulnerability. The rulers knew that the night could be invaded, not just by assassins, but by their own doubts and fears. This tension between control and surrender, between ritual and rest, is the heartbeat of royal bedtime stories. It reveals the deeply human struggle to find safety in a world full of uncertainty. What can we learn from these strange and often extravagant rituals? Perhaps that our own fears and hopes around sleep are not so different from those of kings and queens. That behind the gold and silk, behind the power and privilege, lies a shared need for comfort, security, and peace. And maybe that the weird habits we have, whether it's a night light, a lucky charm, or a bedtime prayer, are echoes of ancient battles fought in bedrooms across the ages. Sleep is a mystery and a necessity. It's a place where we confront ourselves, where dreams can inspire or terrify. And as these royal stories show us, the quest for restful sleep is as old as power itself. So tonight, as you close your eyes, remember the kings and queens who did strange, wonderful, and sometimes unsettling things before bed, all in the name of holding on to their strength, their sanity, and their sovereignty. Because in the end, no matter who we are, the night is a shared kingdom. Thank you for joining this journey into the weirdest things royalty did before bed. Don't forget to subscribe to uncover more stories that reveal the hidden sides of history.